Okay, we are live right here on X, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Rumble. Thank you all for joining me today. This is the Liz Wheeler Show. I'm your host, Liz Wheeler. Before we get started today, and you saw the title of this show, this episode is going to be a banger. Before we get started, if you could subscribe to the show, I would greatly appreciate that. Go over to Spotify. You can just pick up your phone, tap on that Spotify app, search The Liz Wheeler Show. You'll see us. We're right there. You'll recognize it because the logo has my face on it. Hit subscribe, give us a 5-star review. I know a lot of you have been doing that every time I ask, and I really appreciate it. Spotify is a censorship-free app, and we have video over there. So anytime there's content that we have to tiptoe around on YouTube or on Facebook, you can get it without any censorship over on Spotify. So highly recommend subscribing over there. Okay, what are we talking about today? Shortly after Charlie Kirk's assassination, a video about Charlie's alleged assassin, Tyler Robinson, was posted online. Since that video was posted just days after Charlie's murder, it has received over 750,000 views. That's a lot of attention. Now, this video was a little bit different from the other videos because it was created by a person not in the media, not a friend of Charlie's, not in the conservative movement. No, rather, this video was created by an individual who frequented the same perverted hangouts online that Tyler Robinson did. To put it bluntly, the individual who created this video was a furry, which is a perverted sexual fetish, just like Tyler Robinson. Now, fast forward to this week. A close friend of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs, a person who hung out with them regularly at their apartment, has revealed to the maker of that video that I just described to you, for the very first time, what Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs were like, what their romantic relationship was like, the state of their mental health, what they did for fun, red flags that existed in their background, and many more details he observed as someone who was frequently inside the apartment with Robinson and Twiggs. We are going to read his account today. Also included in this report are newly unearthed messages in the group's Discord chat. We've heard about this Discord chat. We're going to read a message that we have not yet seen until today for ourselves, though we'd heard reports about it. Oddly enough, this particular report that I'm about to show you did not come out today. This report is several days old, in fact, yet it's gotten little to no attention online. Though you would think that this information would be pertinent to the larger investigation into what happened before the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Today's episode of The Liz Wheeler Show is sponsored by Kindred Harvest. In fact, Kindred Harvest, right here with us today. This is the immunity tea. Not because I'm sick, I never get sick, but because it's delicious. And it comes in a very pretty bottle. Immunity tea. Now, if you're going to drink tea, you need to know what's in it because the Chinese tea industry has flooded America with products contaminated by microplastics and heavy metals. They don't care about your health. They just care about your wallet. In fact, they profit when you are sick. Kindred Harvest is the American answer to this problem. Third-party lab tested, zero microplastics, zero heavy metals, blended and packed right here in the USA. And you can get any kind of tea you want, whether it's a morning energy boost or an evening herbal. You know, it's clean tea for the entire family. My daughter likes the caffeine-free cinnamon tea. I'm very partial to the immunity tea. My husband likes the sleepy time tea. Stop trusting China with your family's health. Choose American quality. Choose Kindred Harvest. Go to kindredharvest.co and use code Liz for 20% off. That's kindredharvest.co. Use code Liz for 20% off. I endorse. I highly recommend. It's delicious. Okay. So for the first time ever, an individual who was a close friend of Charlie Kirk's alleged assassin, Tyler Robinson, and his transgender-identifying lover with whom he cohabitated, they shared an apartment. This individual was a frequent guest at Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs' apartment, and he reached out to the maker of a viral video and said, hey, I'd like to share with you some insider information about Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs. So let's bring up this report. This report was published on Substack on an account called Anonbird. Of course, anonymous. That's typical for the chronically online, which I think is a pretty apropos description of Tyler Robinson and probably Lance Twiggs. But this is what this individual, and this is first from the maker of that video. He said, on September 23rd, 2025, I published a video on YouTube titled "The Man Who Murdered Charlie Kirk," reviewing all of the publicly available information regarding Tyler Robinson, his assassin, and Lance Twiggs, Tyler's roommate and romantic partner. Shortly thereafter, I was contacted by someone familiar with Lance and Tyler. They provided an alleged firsthand account of what their relationship was like, how it developed, and some of the events that may have driven Tyler to do what he did. They have allowed me to publish this information, but wish to remain anonymous. They provided me with the following. Number one, photos verifying their connection. Number two, their firsthand account of Tyler and Lance's relationship. Number three, photos of Tyler and Lance's apartment, as well as drawings allegedly made by Lance. Wait until you see those. Number four, Discord archives of 3 servers that Lance and Tyler were in. The majority of this, the author explains, is explained in this video. He links back to his video that he published after Charlie's death. But here, I'll be leaving photos of everything for you to pursue and hopefully help make sense of what happened. You'll notice some of the information has been redacted. Pardon me. This is done with the express purpose of preserving the anonymity of the leaker. I'll start with the first message that the leaker sent. Now, when he refers to the leaker, he's talking about this close friend of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs who was frequently at Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs' apartment. And this is the message that the friend of the alleged assassin sent. He said, "Hello, I just watched your video on the Charlie Kirk assassin, Tyler, and thought you did a good job. I happen to know Tyler and Lance IRL in real life." There's a redacted form. I assume this is where he reveals his identity, which he wants to remain anonymous. He says, "I don't take a lot of pictures, so I can't prove it very well, but I am in Discord servers where both of them are in it, including the one where Tyler posted his confession. I don't have anything super big to say in relation to the murder, and I hope to stay anonymous." There's another redacted portion. "I have some pictures of that and some stories I can tell. I don't know. I know myself if was researching them, I'd like to know more because whenever I watch your videos, I always end up wanting to know way more details." So then the Anon Bird Substack says, "I requested that the leaker verify his connection in some way, to which he provided 2 photos." And we're going to show those on the screen. This first is a screenshot of a Discord chat. Now, this Discord chat you and I have heard about before. We heard almost immediately after the assassination of Charlie Kirk that his alleged assassin, Tyler Robinson, had admitted to his Discord chat. There were 20 to 30 different members in this Discord chat that he committed this murder. And that's exactly what we see here visualized. This is the first time that I have seen this. I'd heard about this, but I had not seen this before. And this is what the username Zealous Monkey, that is Tyler Robinson's username. And he posted on September 11th, 2025 at 9:57 p.m. He said, "Hey guys, I have bad news for you all. It was me at UVU yesterday. I'm sorry for all of this. I'm surrendering through a sheriff friend in a few moments. Thanks for all the good times and laughs. You've all been so amazing. Thank you all for everything." A month later, it's still so disturbing. It's still so upsetting to read that. We've read the text of that before. I had not visually seen the screenshot of that before. And at the time that that was posted, you can see at the top of that screenshot, it says general, and then the little green dot indicates that 11 of the Discord members were online at the time that the screenshot was taken. So, and that was just not, that doesn't even indicate the number of people who were members of that chat, but who were online at that very moment. Suffice to say, at least a dozen people read that confession right then at the time that the screenshot was taken. So this anonymous account, the maker of this video who published the Substack, says, "Above is an original image of the confession that Tyler posted to his friend's Discord server, which matches the photo published by Ken Klippenstein. Below, they also provided an original image of the local police outside of Lance and Tyler's apartment taken from across the street. You can see this. It shows an apartment building. It's roped off with yellow caution tape. The entrance is completely blocked off, and there are sheriffs. It looks like pickup trucks from the sheriff's office that are parked in front of the building. The lights are, of course, on in the entrance of that building. You can tell that it's a crime scene, that there are police there, and they have taken over. But this is a never-before-seen photograph from outside of Tyler Robinson's and Lance Twiggs's shared apartment. The writer goes on to say, with that out of the way, confirming that this individual who reached out to him is actually legitimate, was a friend of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs, and not just someone making up lies, pretending to be associated for attention. He says, with that out of the way, I'll start with their firsthand account of the state of the apartment, as well as Tyler and Lance's relationship in the months leading up to the shooting. Then he provides a series of screenshots from this friend of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs, detailing the state of the apartment first, and Lance Twiggs's mental state, which is intricately tied to the state of the apartment, as well as his relationship with Tyler Robinson. And we're going to go through these and read the information because there's some pretty interesting revelations that are contained. It paints a more complete picture of these two individuals. So the friend of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs says, yeah, the apartment would drastically shift from clean to super dirty, depending on the state of Lance's mood. I don't have too many pictures of most of the mess, but basically he'd start living in the living room and just start turning it into his nest. Then there's a name redacted. Somebody moved out, and right after, Tyler moved in, like 2 weeks after. Lance had a really big breakdown. The living room went from a place, blank name, could have guests over, to something it felt like another redaction to hide this person's identity. Again, another redaction, friends over, but everyone would get kind of weirded out by all the trash. So I think the former roommate of Lance Twiggs whose name is redacted in this particular text. The former roommate of Lance Twiggs' friends would come over, but everyone would get kind of weirded out by all the trash. So the Substack author says, in the screenshot above, the leaker describes how the state of the living room had to be hidden whenever other guests came to the apartment due to the quote-unquote nest that Lance had created. And there's photos of that. I'm going to show you that in just a minute. We'll get to it in a second. He continues below. This is the friend of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs again, describing Lance Twiggs. Twiggs basically had like layers of wires, random Temu trinkets, decorations, random art projects, clothes, and empty alcohol containers everywhere. And if anyone touched it, he'd get livid. A name that's been redacted was banned from the apartment for a while because he kept touching the trinkets. I wish I still had pictures, but I felt sort of guilty, the friend of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs writes, and deleted them since I knew Lance wasn't in the right state of mind. For context, he says, I've been playing games with Lance and Tyler for like 6 years. That's a long time. It's an acquaintance that has spent a good many hours with these individuals. He writes, I count myself kind of close to them, but I was trying to separate them from myself because being around them wasn't good for me. I say them, but Tyler was always really level-headed and easygoing. But Lance could be anywhere from too depressed to talk to manic, wide-eyes, crazy person. During this first nest phase, Lance started working very rarely. He worked with his dad for a tub repair company. They'd either repair tubs or install them at construction sites. But when Lance was super depressed or just too manic, he'd take the day off work and hit his THC vape drink and scroll reels. Isn't it interesting? I know this is not even the time for us to talk about marijuana, but isn't it interesting that in so many of these cases, it is a common denominator, this addiction to THC, in this case, THC vape. And this is not even the only mention of it. We'll get to, you can hear it for yourself as we continue to scroll down these text messages. The Substack author says the message below has been censored to preserve the leaker's identity. But when he writes, because he just dropped out of college and was tired of living with his parents, it is in reference to Tyler Robinson. So the friend of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs says, anyway, 2 weeks before, when the apartment was mostly normal, a redacted portion. And this is where the Substack author says he was referring to Tyler Robinson because he just dropped out of college and was tired of living with his parents. He had been working with his dad at a stone cutting business where they'd install countertops. Tyler was kind of your normal blue collar Utah guy. Most conversations with him, he'd talk hunting, camping, gaming, and he loved talking about fishing. The Substack author says the message below is also in reference to Tyler and can be read as, so I felt super bad when Tyler first moved in with Lance. The friend says, so I felt super bad when he first moved in with Lance Twiggs, normal for like 2 weeks, and then Lance went nuts, and the entire downstairs just became his nest. So we're starting to have this picture painted of Lance Twiggs, aren't we? We knew that he was not in good mental health because of his identity as transgender, but it just gets worse and worse. The friend says he, referring to Lance Twiggs, he'd be doing experiments in the kitchen, which were mostly just growing mold in Tupperware mugs, and the kettle, mold in mugs and the kettle, with random Temu trinkets and rocks submerged in them. But every once in a while, I'd try and have a talk with Lance and try and get him to like realize he needed help without making him go ballistic. I'm not going to say it was all just him being insane. The friend says his mom is like super Mormon and also kind of crazy, so there's that. And all the drugs like weed, LSD, shrooms, DMT, and I think he said Molly, but I'm not sure. Also, alcoholic levels of alcohol. Now, these text messages that I'm reading to you were sent from a friend of Lance Twiggs and Tyler Robinson, who was a frequent guest at their apartment, who was in their close friend circle. He said he played games with Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs for 6 years. These text messages were sent on September 25th, so a week and a couple of days after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And these messages were sent from this friend of Lance Twiggs and Tyler Robinson to an individual who had created a video that went pretty viral on YouTube about Tyler Robinson. And it was as I mentioned at the beginning, it was a video that was from a slightly different perspective than a lot of reports, because the individual who created this video was also a frequent participant in some of these demented online hangouts that Tyler Robinson was known to be involved in. He goes on to say, the friend of Lance Twiggs and Tyler Robinson says, Lance has always been a little weird and quirky, but never really crazy. He was constantly arguing with his mom every time he saw her, and then ranting about Republicans and Mormons when he got home. I'd sometimes talk with him for like 4 hours of him just ranting about his mom and family. He really hates Mormons. Also, at that time, politically, Lance and I would both probably describe ourselves as libertarian, and Tyler was very apolitical. Lance had his nest phase for probably 3 or 4 months before he sort of went back to normal. But at the tail end, after we'd both talked for a while, he told me he was trans and that it wouldn't change anything, and that I could even use whatever pronouns and he wouldn't care. Now, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? It seems to me that there are several different types of individuals who identify as trans. Pardon me. There are the individuals who seem to sincerely suffer from gender dysphoria. They feel uncomfortable in their own body. That's one group. And then there's the second group, who are men who suffer from autogynephilia. They get sexually aroused by the idea of themselves dressed as a woman. And then there's the third category, which seems to be men and women, actually. This is true for the Covenant school shooter that we saw in Nashville, who identified as non-binary or trans too. Individuals who aren't necessarily unhappy in their bodies, like those with gender dysphoria, they aren't necessarily sexually aroused by the idea of themselves as the opposite sex, but they have been captured by the ideology of transgenderism, or the underlying ideology, which is queer theory, which is a political ideology. And it seems clearly Lance Twiggs was severely mentally ill based on his behavior, but it also seems if he did not feel that strongly about being referred to by quote unquote chosen transgender pronouns, it seems like he may be in that third category of identifying as transgender because he was captured by the ideology of the thing versus suffering from autogynephilia or gender dysphoria. That's just speculation based on the limited amount of information that we know. My analysis could change if we learn when and if we learn more information about him, but that comment did stick out to me when I first read it as being an indicator that maybe he was captured by the ideology, the political ideology of the thing. The friend of Lance Twiggs and Tyler Robinson continues. He says, over the next week and a half, the living room got dismantled. He vacuumed and cleaned the kitchen a bit. He still kept one mold experiment, though, outside for some reason, but it was kind of relieving to not see so much trash lying around. We weren't allowed to toss even the most mundane trash, like napkins and Taco Bell sauce packets, which, redacted name, had an entire drawer of. So seeing all the cans and bottles disappear was super nice. Another redacted name started commenting on how it's nice that we could hang out without being scared of accidentally touching trash or a trinket and having Lance freak out. We'd have a mostly weekly magic night at the apartment where everyone would come drink, get high, and play magic. There's that reference to drug abuse again. And he had mentioned several different drugs. He had said LSD, he had said he thought Molly, he had said weed. Lance started attending again after he became mostly normal, attending these weekly magic nights. However, the friend writes, in between all of his turns, he'd go hang out with Tyler, and we'd have to call him to the tables every time it was his turn. One of my gym buddies was the first to pick up on Tyler and Lance being really close. The friend writes, I was in denial for months because I thought Tyler was straight. And also, I kind of did not want it to be true. There's a redacted portion. Eventually, I kind of snapped out of it like the nth time I saw them asleep cuddling on the couch. And there's another redacted portion, although I'd be super curious what's under that redaction. He said, I kind of didn't think too much of it since Lance would get super cuddly every time he got drunk, which is how I think they got together because I'm pretty sure Tyler was a virgin when he moved in. So probably when Lance was in the cuddly mood, probably something happened, but that's just my guess. So this friend is portraying Lance Twiggs as not only being severely mentally unstable, but also being a gay sexual predator, it sounds like. The friend says, I started noticing changes in Lance's political views as the presidential election got closer. He amped up the complaints of old people staring at him, which probably was because he dressed like a stone and not because he was female presenting, because all he did in that department was grow out his hair and wear mascara every once in a while. He also hated that the construction workers would misgender him, which I thought was weird since he said he was fine with any pronoun. He sounds severely mentally unstable. The friend says Tyler wouldn't really get political until after the election. He'd sometimes just casually bring up the latest thing Trump had done and complain about what it'd do to the country, but in a very level-headed way. Before the election, Lance's friend group was the quirky LGBT group with a lot of mental illnesses. Not saying the two are linked, but that's how my friends knew them. They're the people who were in Lance's server for the most part. If that is not a red flag for the FBI, if I were the FBI, let me phrase it how I've phrased it before. If I were the FBI, that's a particular message that I would be interested in. Before the election, Lance's friend group was the quirky LGBT group with a lot of mental illnesses. Not saying the two are linked, but that's how my friends knew them. They're the people who are in Lance's server for the most part. We'll get into this a little later on, but remember that the FBI is currently investigating some of these radical trans groups to determine whether they had foreknowledge of the plot to assassinate Charlie Kirk. And I can only hope that that investigation would include members of these Discord servers and people who were closely associated with the activities of not only Tyler Robinson, but I would hope Lance Twiggs, who seems, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here because we have more of these text messages to read, who I'm beginning to think, I suspected this all along, but this is evidence to substantiate my suspicion, who seems that Lance Twiggs may have been the impetus for Tyler Robinson's political radicalization. The friend of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs continues, after the election, they became a lot more political, but not to an extremist level. By this point, he says, I could safely say Lance and Tyler were some flavor of left-wing. Well, I'd kind of become tired of politics and mostly apolitical, but never anything I thought was like dangerous. At some point, they told me about their relationship and were pretty open about it after that. It became very uncomfortable for me, the friend of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs writes, because while I don't think of myself as homophobic, seeing two dudes constantly make out, or something else is redacted, I shudder to imagine what it is, was a bit much. Also, since Lance's room, and I apologize that this is graphic, but I do think this is pertinent to this picture we are painting of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs' character. The friend of Tyler and Lance says also, since Lance's room was always super messy, so they'd bang in Tyler's room, something is redacted, and I didn't like hearing it. The friend says Lance started becoming more and more erratic again until at the end of December, he just had another nuclear meltdown after having another argument. Also, a couple months before, we noticed Lance had been growing breasts and said that he'd been taking black market HRT, that's hormone replacement therapy, which I do not know what that entailed, but I think it was making him very erratic. So he basically shut down for like 2 weeks, not talking, just hitting his vapes in the living room in the dark. You'll remember from earlier in this string of text messages that when Lance Twiggs' vapes were referenced earlier, it was described as THC vapes. So, THC vapes. The friend of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs says, I thought he kind of started going back to normal after that because he started talking again. I was so effing wrong. The friend says, I had another magic night at the end of January, and there's a big redacted part. So even though Lance wasn't completely fine, I just kind of did it to test the waters. I should have guessed because the nest was starting to form again. You'll remember that the nest was the area in the living room that Lance Twiggs had all kinds of trinkets and wires and doodles and art projects and junk and trash all piled up. I'm going to show you a picture of that in a minute. And he freaked out at anyone who touched it. The friend of Lance Twiggs and Tyler Robinson says he, Lance Twiggs, was watching Doctor Who in the living room, and so I thought if he was just doing that, he'd be fine. But people started to show up and talk before we started, and he just started yelling at us from the other room to shut the F up, which we thought it was a joke since this was standard Magic Night procedure. He yelled again, and then we got quiet till enough people showed up to start a game. During the game, one of my more autistic friends started to bring up transgenders in sports. He literally couldn't get further than those two before Lance yelled at him to STFU up from the other room. And to everyone's amazement, he tried to bring it up like 3 more times in rapid succession before being shouted down, literally not even a second after he started his sentence every time. The friend says it became a very awkward game. It's pretty funny to think back on now. Bro could not take a hint. After that, more people showed up and we started having 2 games going, and the mood mostly stabilized, and Lance just came in with a sort of loopy grin and a bottle of something. He started trying to get my attention while we were playing and eventually started mixing a bunch of cards together and throwing them all around the table, which was weird, but not the weirdest thing he'd done all night. Towards the end of the night, he just disappeared, and we heard a lot of thumping coming from upstairs. We finished the magic night, and I started picking up the cards, thinking I'd help Lance pick up his cards, but they were all mine, and then I realized he dumped out all my extra rares that I didn't have in decks, and that's what he'd mixed up and started throwing, which to me was weird because I never really got caught in the crossfire of Lance's crazy. It was usually other people. We stopped magic nights for a while after that, the friend writes. Also, apparently, Lance had gone upstairs and gone into full tantrum mode and was thrashing around on the floor while Tyler tried to calm him down, which, the friend writes, funnily enough, would make that the 3rd time someone at Magic Night went full tantrum and thrashed around on the ground because one of Lance's friends would crash out a lot. After that, Lance went effing mental. There's a name redacted in the following text, and the second half of the sentence reads, and he'd be super wide-eyed, like either a loopy grin or a grin like the effing Joker, depending on his mood. The nest came back in full force, and Lance started living downstairs full-time again. Now we scroll down, and we find photographs of this nest that's been described. You can see this on the screen. It's incredibly disturbing. It looks like a cross between a hoarder's living room and the laboratory of a domestic terrorist. And I don't even mean that tongue-in-cheek. That's literally what it looks like. Wires and junk all tangled together, and trash all tangled together on this table. And the friend of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs, who provided this picture, says this is a picture of a kind of cleaned up version, indicating that it was worse than this at times. Imagine this type of mess, he writes, but denser and all over the entire living room and the kitchen counters. He started playing on his DS and drawing shit in it, I think PictoChat, and scribbling it all out while giggling with the effing wide-eyed Joker smile. He'd either been doing this or his experiments or talking with Chat GPT day in and day out. He hardly ever slept. The experiments, the friend writes, got scarier too. Like jugs of water with whisks full of aluminum foil that had 2 copper wires coming out of them. The water, the friend describes, was clear one day, and at some point, I think the wires got plugged into the outlet because the water turned brown and the aluminum foil was pretty burnt. He also started leaving little papers around the house that he had scribbled on while doing that giggling shit. And there's a photograph provided of one of these notes that was left around the house, and it is indecipherable. It's doodles that don't amount to anything and words and ciphers that don't seem to make any sense. And maybe it doesn't make any sense to me. Maybe there's some cryptology expert that can look at this and can decipher what he's actually talking about. Maybe this is drugged out nonsense. I don't know. But you can see that this is deeply disturbed doodling. This is not a Bob Ross painting. We'll put it that way. And there's many examples pictured here. We're scrolling through them right now. Many examples of these demented doodles. Tons of them. And then you come to pictures on cardboard of some of these experiments. Just scrolling and scrolling through these. This is the sheer volume of these scribbled notes that were left around the apartment. This was not a one-time thing. This was not a couple here and there or one day. I mean, this is a complete catalog of all of this artwork. And the friend, I say artwork, tongue-in-cheek, the friend of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs, the friend, we're reading his text messages. He's the one who spent a lot of time with Lance Twiggs and Tyler Robinson at their apartment playing games with them. He said that he had played games with them for 6 years. So he spent a lot of time one-on-one with Lance Twiggs, it sounds like, and he describes Lance Twiggs' extreme mental instability and his drug usage and the evolution of his political ideology. He goes on to say, which this stuff, and he's referring to the pictures that we just showed on the screen, this stuff looks bad, but it's even worse when you saw his face when he was doodling this shit, combined with the giggling and how vigorously he'd scribble. It was very scary, the friend said. And the way he spoke was weird. It was a bunch of words, but none of them made sense together. Or sometimes it'd be in rhyme, or just sometimes he'd only smile and point at shit. The friend of Lance Twiggs and Tyler Robinson then says, bro, if I were religious, I would have called an exorcist. The smile was so effing scary. A name in the next text message is redacted. That redacted name, and he showed me what conversations he was having with Chat GPT. He told me he'd solved some equation backwards and showed me the Chat GPT texts as proof. The chats were just paragraphs of random Greek and I think Roman symbols with numbers and random letters going on and on and on. He'd somehow gotten it to respond in kind as well. He told me to start scrolling faster, and so I did, and he kept telling me faster until he was basically screaming at me to scroll faster, and the effing Chat GPT chats just went on for forever. I just sat there scrolling at max speed for at least a minute or two, and by the bottom it was still in the weird symbols. He started yelling at me that Nikola Tesla was abused by the people in his time and that no one we knew was smart enough to solve that equation, including me, because he was way smarter than me. This was all in weird, broken up sentences, too. Definitely added to the creepy factor. Tyler told me that Lance had basically been up for like 3 days straight talking to ChatGPT at that time. The next text message from Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs' friend contains a redacted name, and the remainder of the sentence that starts with the redacted name is, he'd sometimes just be sobbing in Tyler's arms, and Tyler would be rocking him back and forth. We all thought Tyler was a trooper for putting up with Lance in that state. And then, again, I apologize for the graphic image on the screen. This is a photograph of a sink, a bathroom sink, a disgustingly dirty bathroom sink, and a used condom is sitting on the corner of that sink with a foot visible underneath it. And it is proof, I suppose, of the following text message from this friend of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs. And it says, crazily enough, while Lance was like that, Tyler was still hitting that, meaning they were still engaging in sexual activity despite Lance Twiggs's extreme mental instability. The Substack author says below, the leaker, the friend of Tyler and Lance, describes how he was about to move out of the area and informed Lance. The screenshot is heavily redacted to preserve his identity. It just says, I told Lance. It was crazy, the friend says. He like snapped back to reality for a second and just thanked me for all the good times we'd had, redacted, hanging out throughout the years. After that, I think Lance had been brought back just a little bit, and he even let Tyler take him out of the house to start seeing a psychologist. It made me feel bad, not gonna lie. I was starting to become really apathetic and not really care what happened. Like, it was just too much energy to try to deal with Lance. Tyler really was a trooper for dealing with him. Lance even calmed down enough for us to hold like 3 more magic nights. We all thought Lance would be okay because he had Tyler, who was basically his handler at that point, to take care of him. The next text has a redacted sentence. It seems to be describing the name of someone who lived across the street from the apartment. Let me know that Lance had gotten into an argument with his grandpa, who owned the apartment, and his grandpa had taken his car away. This, I'm not sure, but I suspect put him into another one of those spirals. The entirety of the next text is redacted. And I don't know about you, but I feel incredible curiosity to know what's underneath the redactions each time we encounter them. Not so much, no, all of them. I was going to say not so much when it's just an individual name, but actually, yes, I want to know the names of everyone who had close associations and relationships with these two. This particular friend goes on and says, I imagine Lance was just alone with Tyler in the apartment, just driving Tyler effing crazy. I'd be hard-pressed to stay sane while living alone with Lance while he's like that. Pardon me. Another redacted name. Lance and Tyler joined the Discord call a couple of times. Lance joined and would say like one thing, then be silent, and Tyler would just talk normally. Tyler even joined the call like 2 weeks before the assassination and acted completely normal. And also, for the record, Tyler 100% calls Lance my love when they are talking alone. That, more than anything, makes those texts real to me. The texts, of course, that he's referring to are the texts that law enforcement released after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the texts between Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs, where Tyler was admitting to Lance Twiggs what he had done. This friend says, for the record, Tyler calls Lance my love when they're talking alone. That, more than anything, makes those texts real to me. Hopefully this sheds some light on like what was behind the scenes. The author of this Substack then goes on to say, in this last message, when the leaker references those texts, he's referencing the messages published by prosecutors of Tyler supposedly confessing to the murder of Charlie Kirk. This person also sent me Discord logs of 3 different servers that Tyler and Lance were parts of. Lance under the name Lance Clawdle and Fluxalotl, and Tyler as Zealous Monkey and Bed. Oh, that one's too sexually graphic. Inspector for me to read. They date back. Oh, and I think, by the way, I did accurately identify Zealous Monkey at the top of the show as being Tyler. They date all the way back, these Discord logs of 3 different servers, all the way back to 2020. Most of it is pretty mundane, but I've picked out what I see as the most notable or relevant messages below. This is what the author of the Substack, the creator of that video, is explaining. Also, as you read, keep in mind that the conversations moved from the bottom upwards. Now, there are about 100 of these messages, and they are not quite as illuminating informationally as the account from Lance Twiggs and Tyler Robinson's friend of what Lance Twiggs was like, what his mental state was like, what his relationship with Tyler Robinson was like. So we'll post a link to this Substack, and anybody who wants to read those messages in the entirety can read those. Suffice to say, I suspected at the very beginning, in the days after Charlie Kirk's assassination, that Lance Twiggs was going to be a pivotal figure. We were told by the media, and I believe even by law enforcement at the time, or from law enforcement sources, that Lance Twiggs was cooperating with authority. And they presented this as, oh, the transgender is doing the right thing, and that it was the white male who was raised by a Republican family who committed the assassination. There was a political undercurrent to that messaging. And I wondered about the accuracy of that report. Was Lance Twiggs cooperating? What was that cooperation? Did law enforcement understand that Lance Twiggs could have been essentially the gateway drug for Tyler Robinson to be captured by the transgender ideology? And I think these messages, this illustration of Lance Twiggs and his mental instability, whether it's his nest or his mold experiments or his breakdowns or his chat GPT obsession, his constant THC vaping, whatever it might be, his insane drawings that you saw so many examples of, it seems to me that he could be the gateway through which Tyler Robinson was groomed. Because think about, too, probably the most disturbing picture that I showed you, and I, in a sense, apologize for having to show you that picture because it's so gross, but that kitchen sink with the condom on it. If Tyler Robinson was a virgin, as this friend described him to be when he moved in with Lance Twiggs, and if Lance Twiggs was drinking to alcoholic levels on a regular basis and, got cuddly when he was drunk, as the friend described, and would cuddle with Tyler Robinson on the couch, and the friend suspected that one of those times when they were cuddling, something sexual happened, and after that, it didn't take too long for the two of them to be sexual partners with each other, and that even in Lance Twiggs's state of extreme mental instability, like that sounds like institutionalizing levels of insanity to me, that Tyler Robinson was still engaging in sexual activity with Lance Twiggs. It seems to me that this is obvious where he was radicalized, obvious where his views were formed and who informed his views, and it just makes it more incumbent on law enforcement to do a very thorough and complete assessment and investigation into these associations of Tyler Robinson, because he doesn't fully fit the profile of, how do I say this correctly? It would have been less of a surprise to me if Lance Twiggs had been the one who had assassinated Charlie Kirk. That makes more sense to me, given his ideology, given his insanity, given his drug use. But it seems to me there might be I described Lance Twiggs based on the description by his friend as having been a sexual predator over Tyler Robinson. It sounds to me like Tyler Robinson had some sort of unhealthy, toxic attachment, sexual attachment to his transgender lover, and that could have motivated him, that maybe he drew his ideas from this individual, and maybe groups that this individual, Lance Twiggs, was involved in. And it seems to me, if we are actually committed to dismantling these terror threats, these domestic terror cells that exist in our country, then that's an absolute necessity. That's a non-negotiable that needs to be investigated. So yesterday, the judge that's presiding over Tyler Robinson's case in Utah, his name is Judge Tony Graff, he granted Tyler Robinson's motion to appear in civilian clothes in his court appearances. Tyler Robinson's lawyers had requested that he not appear in like a prison jumpsuit during his court appearances, that it might bias the jury against him because of the presumption of innocence, because he's not convicted yet. The judge granted his motion, but denied the second half of the motion, which was to remove the shackles during court appearances. That part stays. And then also granted in part his motion to remove cameras from the courtroom. Cameras will not record Robinson entering or exiting the courtroom. And you have to wonder why that is, but take a look at this video.
Accordingly, defendant's motion to strike the sheriff's response is granted. However, under Rule 3-414 of the Utah Rules of Judicial Administration, the court is required to coordinate courtroom security with the sheriff's department. Consistent with that rule and with the defendant's agreement, The court has considered the substance of the state's opposition and the memorandum prepared by the court security director that was attached to it. Going forward, if either party has a security concern specific to this case, they may present evidence from the Sheriff's Department by affidavit, declaration, exhibit, or testimony. This order does not limit the Sheriff's Department's ability to coordinate with the court or otherwise act as authorized by law. Turning to the motion to appear in civilian clothing and without physical restraints. The parties agree that during trial, a defendant has a right to appear in civilian clothing and that any restraints must be concealed from the jury. Mr. Robinson now seeks to extend those rights to all pretrial proceedings. The court considered each request separately. In relation to requests to appear in civilian clothing, Mr. Robinson asks to appear in civilian clothing at all pretrial hearings. He argues that the extensive media coverage of this case creates a real risk of prejudice if the public and potential jurors repeatedly see him in jail attire. The state, the Sheriff's Department, and the court security director opposed the request, arguing that jail clothing assists with safety and identification. The court has balanced these competing concerns. The case has attracted extraordinary public and media attention. Images of Mr. Robinson in jail clothing are likely to circulate widely and influence prospective jurors. Given the scale of that publicity, the risk of prejudice is significant. However, Mr. Robinson's, let me see here. As previously stated, Mr. Robinson sits before this court presumed innocent, and that presumption remains unless and until each element of every offense charged against him is proved beyond a reasonable doubt. To date, this has not occurred, and the presumption of innocence remains. Balancing these factors, the court finds that Mr. Robinson's right to the presumption of innocence outweighs the minimal inconvenience of permitting civilian attire, and Mr. Robinson shall be dressed as one who is presumed innocent.
Okay, let's
Accordingly, the defendant's request to appear in civilian clothing for all.
In the live chat, there's an individual that asks, is Tyler the victim now? No. No, he's not. And here's why. Because making an excuse for someone's behavior is different than investigating and explaining the origin of someone's behavior. Each and every one of us is given free will. We make a decision on a daily basis whether we're going to do something moral or whether we're going to do something immoral. And regardless of what factors may have contributed to Tyler Robinson's likelihood of making a bad decision, it's still ultimately his responsibility to make the right choice. And in this case, I mean, it seems ridiculous to even say this. It's obvious to everyone, it should be obvious to everyone, that assassinating someone with whom you disagree politically is wrong. So no, Tyler is not the victim. He committed a heinous crime and he should face justice for that. However, if you want to understand how something like this happened, how someone was radicalized, how someone who was seemingly raised in a Republican family in Utah could go on to commit a crime, well, you untangle their background. What influenced them? Who influenced them? What things happened to them? Were crimes committed against them? Were they treated badly? Did they do drugs? Were they chronically online? Did they dabble in radical ideologies? How did this happen? That's what we're untangling today. That's what these text messages reveal more than anything else. That the influences which may have contributed to Tyler Robinson's decision to murder Charlie Kirk in cold blood. So no, Tyler Robinson is not the victim. That's not how I would describe it in any way, shape, or form. But it makes it, once again, more incumbent than ever to investigate everyone who was associated with not just Tyler Robinson, but Lance Twiggs, because I can almost guarantee you that you will find something there. All right, guys, if you have not subscribed to Blaze TV, now is the time to do so. The truth is, of course, that Blaze TV only exists because people like you refuse to let fear silence the truth. Darkness never has the final word, even though we cover a lot of darkness on this show. But in America, darkness doesn't win. And it doesn't win with us. When you subscribe, you make sure that truth has a voice, not just today, but for the next generation. By joining us, you are standing shoulder to shoulder with a community that knows that America is still worth fighting for. You are choosing courage over censorship, truth over fear, and light over darkness. Join Blaze TV today at blazetv.com/Liz and get $20 off right now. For as little as $8 a month, you can be part of shaping the future. That's blazetv.com/Liz. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for contributing to the live chat. I've been keeping an eye on your comments as they've come streaming in. It's I would call it a morbidly fascinating picture that was painted by Lance Twiggs and Tyler Robinson's friend via these descriptions of their apartment and Lance's behavior, the magic nights and the nest and the demented drawings and his tantrums and his drug usage and how he essentially lured Tyler Robinson into this relationship and Tyler Robinson's sexual deviance and saying yes to that and then continuing to engage in sexual activity with Lance Twiggs despite Lance Twiggs' severe mental instability. That's messed up. That is the darkness that we were discussing before. Thank you for following along, and make sure you share this episode because this is information that should be widely known. This is the first step. This information is kind of like the first step in unlocking the world to the whole network of associates of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs, which are going to ultimately help us solve this case and prevent these domestic terror cells, which we know want to kill us, from ever being successful in that crime again. So make sure you're subscribed to the show, youtube.com/Liz Wheeler, x.com/Liz_Wheeler on Spotify. Search The Liz Wheeler Show, hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review. I greatly appreciate you. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.